What is the prototype chain? So every object in JavaScript has a prototype, and when looking for a property on an object, JavaScript will first attempt to find a property on the object itself. If it can't find it, then it will search on the object's prototype, and so on and so on. So let's imagine we had an object called person, and I've got an instance of that object called person, and I'm asking JavaScript to find person.kind. JavaScript will first check the person object to see if there's a property called kind. If it can't find that, then it will look for something called the prototype on the person object. And if that points to another object, it will then search that other object for a property of kind. And if it can find that, it will return that. If it can't find that, if that object's got a prototype, it will keep on going down the prototype chain. And only if none of those objects on the prototype chain have the property of kind will it then return undefined. So this works just like single parent inheritance in, well, class-based languages. Every object will inherit from one other object. So let's give ourselves an example to work with. So I'm going to create an object called animal, and I'm going to give it a property of kind, and I'm going to say it's a human. So in some browsers, Chrome for instance, you can see the object's prototype from what's called the proto property. So if I now console log this here, just so I can add a breakpoint, and then I run this, and then let's just add animal to the watch on the right hand side, and you can see underneath the property of kind, we have a proto, which points to this animal object's prototype. So you can see that actually points to the object. And you can see that object has a number of built-in properties and functions as well. So we've got toString, is prototype of, has own property. This is what you can think of the base object all other objects are defined from. So unfortunately, Proto is not part of the standard interface of JavaScript. Well, not at least until ECMAScript 6. So you shouldn't use it in production code. But anyway, it makes explaining prototypes so easy, I'm going to use it just to explain the concept to you. So if I now created another object called asim, and let's keep it a blank object, I can now link objects together in this prototype chain by assigning them to the proto property. So if you remember, all objects have a proto property. So if I do asim dot, it's double underscore is equal to animal. Okay. Now I've linked the object asim to the object animal. Okay. And now I can type something like console log asim kind. Okay, let me just drop a breakpoint here and run this. Let's look at asim. Let's add it to the watch. So you can see that the asim object here, it doesn't have a kind property, but its prototype is actually the animal object, which has a kind property, and the prototype of the animal object is the base object, which doesn't have any other prototypes because it's the lowest level you can go. So what JavaScript is going to do now is going to look in the asim object for kind. It won't find it. It will then search in the proto object, which is the animal, and in there it will find kind, and it's going to print out human. So now if I let that continue, you can see in the console there it's printing out human. You can check to see if one object is a prototype of another with the isPrototypeOf function. So if I now run this, it's going to say true because animal is a prototype of asim. Also, the lookups are dynamic. So if you add a property to the prototype object, or you change a property of the prototype object, that's reflected dynamically. So now if I run this snippet, let me clear the console. If I run this snippet, the kind of asim on line 16 is now igloo. Because when we're searching for kind on asim, it can't find it on asim. It looks in the animal prototype object, and there I've changed the kind to igloo. So that works if we update the property, the kind property on the prototype object. But what happens if we update the kind property on the asim object? So if I say asim.kind to igloo, what will console log asim.kind print out? And what will console log animal.kind print out? And you can see from the console, asim.kind is igloo as we expect because we've assigned asim.kind to igloo. But, and this might be confusing, but if you look at animal.kind, that is still human. Let's drop a breakpoint here so we can see what's going on. Actually, let's not drop one there. Let's drop one. Let's drop it here. Okay. And now let me expand out asim and let me expand out animal. So when we say asim.kind, so you see kind is equal to human on animal, then let me step over that and let me expand that out again. So you can see it actually sets kind on the asim object. And that's a very important fact. Updating a property that previously only existed on the prototype of an object adds it to the object and not to the prototype of the object. Now this is confusing to a lot of people, especially if you're coming from other languages which perhaps have more classical inheritance mechanisms. So that's why I'm mentioning it here. But it's quite important to know that JavaScript with its prototypal chain, this is how it works. And this is a gotcha that you can get caught out with. So as explained before, using the __ proto property is not well supported, isn't a very well supported way of assigning prototypes to objects. So the next simplest way is using something called the object create function. And this is available in ECMAScript 5 as well. So it's available in all the major browsers. You can use it right now. So if we were to go back up here, and let me just comment this out. Because what we're essentially doing is I'm showing you another way of implementing this kind of strategy, this kind of idea of creating an object or assigning an object's prototype to another object. So we're not going to use that method anymore. What we're going to use is the object create function. So I'm going to create, in fact, it's like this. I'm going to create var asim to object create, and I'm going to pass to it the object that I want to be the prototype of my new object. So what object create does is it will create a new object and assign animal as the prototype of that new object and return that. And that's essentially what we were doing here. We're essentially replacing both of these lines here. So we'd create an object and it will assign the animal to the prototype of the object and return that and assign that to asim. And that's what we're doing here with the object.create method. And the object.create method is the one I'd recommend using. It works in ECMAScript 5 and 6 and in all major browsers. You can also pass an object to the second parameter of object.create to add some default properties to the new object that you're creating. So for instance, if I wanted to add a property of food to my asim object, maybe to signify the favorite food of this animal, what I could pass in is I could pass in food value mango. That is actually my favorite food. And now let me just debug here so you can see what it actually creates. So let me run that. Let's look at asim, and you can see asim now has a food property which is mango. So you might be a bit confused because you might have expected the food property to print out this object here, this value : mango, and actually it's printing out just mango. That's because the second parameter to object.create, this parameter here, is taking an object that describes the properties you want to add onto the created object. You're not passing in an object to use as the properties, but you're passing in an object that describes the properties. So the property we're describing here is that it'll have a key of a name of food, and the value of this property is going to be a string called mango. The reason for that is that the properties, the second parameter of the object.create function is actually an object that describes the properties you want to create on the created object. And we won't be covering all of the different ways that you can define properties with the different parameters using the properties object on this course. It's very, very unlikely that you're going to be asked that in an interview. But if you do want to find out more information about this, just head on over to this page, this link. I'll add it to the show notes and the description of this lecture so you can read further information on it. And here you can find out more information about the properties object and what you can assign to it. So what did we learn? We learned that objects in JavaScript are linked to others in what's called a prototype chain. JavaScript traverses this chain when looking for a property and only returns undefined if it can't find the property from all the objects in the chain. You can manually edit the chain with the __ proto property in some browsers such as Chrome, but more usefully you can use the object.create function to create an object and assign a prototype to it automatically. And that's the recommended way, and it's the way used in all modern browsers. You can pass a properties object param to the second parameter of the object.create function to bootstrap the object created with a default set of properties.